Hi, I'm Eloisa. This video is about what it used to be like in our house, or what it was like 10 months ago before we began the experiment self-responsibility. Actually, my friend Mary pointed out to me that I hadn't really, I was doing all this stuff to correct everything, but I hadn't really described yet on video why and what it actually was like and what our house was like and a household was like. And I also feel like I'm sort of starting to explain in updates the changes that have happened and what it's like now, but I just neglected to share with you what it was actually like in our family before we began the experiment. So this video is just what it used to be like 10 months ago in our home, and I probably won't be able to resist talking about the comparisons of what it's like now or what it's been like over the last 10 months. So how it used to be in our home. So remember, for this experiment, the two issues were about keeping the shared environment clean and tidy and taking responsibility for the shared environment, that we were all in, and contributing to keeping it nice and tidy. And the other one was their treatment of me. Those were the two issues that were a problem, and that the requirement was that there was an attitude shift in order for the children to come back and live in the house. So they have a nice little setup outside with their tents and beds and everything outside, and a little lounge area and an outside kitchen and refrigeration area and everything. So they've got all the things they need. It's just that they're outside. So before they moved outside, and why I got them to be outside was, for those two reasons. And what did that look like? So what that was like is that, over time, the children are now a lot, even before they asked to move out, they're a lot cleaner than they, and keep things tighter than they used to do. For example, when they were very small, I just had no boundaries, none. And so the kids would go outside, and this is when they're very little, from, when they could walk until they're about, 6. They'd go out, they'd go into the dam, they'd get all muddy, and then they'd come back in and they'd walk through the house, leaving a whole muddy footprints everywhere, touch the walls and stuff, and mud was just everywhere. Climb into the bath was all muddy. And then I would clean it up. I'd never make them clean it up or even ask them to clean it up. Or, one day I came in and their whole wall was drawn on with crayon, their whole wall. And I was like, oh, a lovely picture. In fact, I think I even said that. Such a nice picture, you guys, but please don't draw on the wall. Again, and basically saying, oh, we can do whatever we want. They would leave their stuff everywhere. Our house before we moved up to Queensland was just chaos. It was dirty and it was just untidy. I would give it a clean every, couple of weeks or whatever, and I'd tidy everything up. But within sort of an hour or sometimes 15 minutes, it would be complete chaos again, completely trashed. And when I say trashed, I might have folded all the clothes, they'd be in the fold bus, all the clothes would be out everywhere again. On the carpet would just, be spilt things or that I'd have to clean up. At one time it was so dirty that a mouse started living in the corner of our house, and we had to go and get it out. When I left, under the washing machine was a 5 mil sludge thickness of black gunk that I had to chip off with a paint scraper. There was just it was just grimy and dirty and sticky. The doorknobs were always sticky. The chairs were so if people came and sat down, some of them would wipe down the chairs before they sat in them because they were just yucky. Just with food and stickiness and, not cleaning hands and things like that. Sometimes there was food, left around. Sometimes I could smell a smell and be man, it smells like rotting food. And you'd find a raw orange under the carpet or under the couch. Or just something stashed, or chocolate on the couch. Just all these kind of things. So that's when they were very, very little. Then I suppose this has kind of been going on for a long time. Yes, Jesus and Mary visited us one time, and they said to me, they were what is going on? And sort of talked to me about how you need to teach kids to be self-responsible and to do different things. And they were quite capable, even at 2 and 3 to actually beginning to do jobs. And ironically, actually, before I even met Jesus and Mary, I had felt that way, and I'd got the kids to sort of help or started to teach them how to do different things, because kids love actually doing housework, particularly if you're doing it with you. But what I found is that it takes a lot of energy and sometimes time to teach someone how to do something properly. And because I was just so tired at the time, and just felt like I just ended up feeling like, gosh, it's just so much easier if I just do it, and it's so much quicker. And I get really angry, like really quickly, because it wasn't done properly, or I just had to redo it. And I was like, look, I might as well just do it myself. And so that attitude ended up for me causing that the kids didn't learn how to do things, and they didn't take responsibility, and they didn't clean up after themselves, and I ended up doing everything. Man, totally not good. Like, let your kids help and just teach them. And just know that your housework's going to take 4 times as long as it usually does. And that's how it is for a while until they're trained really good in doing it. But it is worth doing it earlier. Anyway, so I had, after sort of a period of time, I ended up educating the kids in how to do them. So they end up doing the dishes and sweeping the floor and doing the drying up. And then they also got started being taught how to do the washing. So I had a period of time where we went from total chaos, a mess. Then we had to go through an education process of like, how do you do a job and how do you do a job properly? And it was lovely. Like Jesus and Mary, when the kids were really small, they would, if they visited us, they'd sometimes help do the dishes and stuff, and they'd talk to the kids. And I remember one conversation where Jesus was like, well, you got to clean, you got to dry it all really well, because if you leave it in a drawer, it's going to go moldy. And the kids were like, oh, moldy, like they knew what moldy was because they'd experienced moldy. And it was just really lovely how I observed them interacting with the children, and it was quite different to the way that I was interacting with the children and teaching them or training them. I noticed that they would give a lot of, just like talk to the kids and have a conversation and work with them, demonstrating what needed to be done, but also explaining what needed to be done and why, and giving the reasons and some of the consequences that might happen if you don't do a job properly, and also the benefits of the job. So Jesus and Mary modelled to me, I suppose, what a good parent would do. And I started experimenting that with the kids. But what I noticed over time is that even though I educated the children in how to clean properly and do things really well, they could do them. They were quite capable of doing them, but they didn't want to, or they had this attitude that they shouldn't have to. And also there began to be this dynamic of sort of competition between the 3 of them, and feeling that it was very unfair if they did something and the other one didn't. And so they'd fight a lot doing the dishes and then not really do the job properly, because they're more concerned about how unfair it was for them, not realizing that they were being unfair to everyone else in the environment by not keeping it clean. And so with time, sort of realized, well, hold on, the attitude's not changing. And so that's happened for years. So I started teaching them how to do stuff when I think, they're about 4 or 5. So they know how, and they know how to. Like if I stick them to it, they do a really good job cleaning. But I have to put a lot of energy in for them to actually do it. So it's indicated to me that it was more of a problem than just education. And I feel that's quite important. There's 2 things. There's sort of attitude and education. Now, you can have a real good attitude but not know how to do something, so you need to be educated. Or you can be very educated and have a very bad attitude and you still don't do a job well. So ours was the second. So they were educated, but they didn't want to do the job well, and their attitude needed to change. And examples of this were like, I might make dinner and say, look, you guys can clean up. They'd leave dishes or not clean them properly. Complain if I said they're not clean properly. Go and like really project anger at me if I said, well, the pot's not clean properly, it needs doing again. If I asked them to wipe up, there'd be a lot of sighing and like, oh, it's just too hard, or, ugh, this is too much, I can't do it. They would have, one time they had, like, I'd ask them to put the compost bin out, and they wouldn't do it. They would stash it somewhere that wasn't actually the place to put it in. So then, stuff got all over the garden, and then they wouldn't pick it up, and they'd think that I should pick it up for them, and they'd be all angry if I tried to, make them pick it up. What else? Oh, just like entitled to a whole lot of stuff. Like they'd, make food and then just leave it in the cupboard and not throw it out when they didn't want to eat it. They just left things all over the floor everywhere. They didn't want to clean properly. It was just like super hard, resistant to cleaning. Like, so we'd do our cleaning once a week as a family. There was always complaining. There was always like competition. There was always like, oh, it's just too hard for me. Oh, he's not doing the job. I did it last time. It was just like every time it was just like, like exasperating really, of like, well, it needs to be cleaned and I want it cleaned. But, sometimes it might take the whole day to do the clean. And even then it wasn't done properly. So this started to sort of make me go, well, hold on, like there's a problem here. And they wouldn't even keep their own areas tidy, which, and I was like, well, how do you can't force someone to do that. And I didn't want to get all angry at them and just like make them do it, because I feel like that's still not coming from their own desire or their own heart of like, yeah, okay, I'm doing the wrong thing and I need to look after my things. So this was sort of happening. And then just the way they were treating me was that, that I should pick up after them, that they should be able to use my stuff whenever they wanted to, that their stuff was my stuff was their stuff, that they could take anything they wanted. I might make some food or whatever, they'd eat it all and not leave me any. They would, just all kinds of things, just leave sticky marks everywhere. They would if I might be having some private time, like just, lying on my bed or thinking or just having some time to myself, they'd just come and interrupt me, expect me to do what they wanted immediately. Again, I set this up over their lifetime because I just would always do it. But it started to sort of feel like I started to get kind of annoyed, and I also started to feel just like I was being really used, that they weren't interested in actually spending time with me or getting to know me. They don't have to, but it just became apparent that when they wanted something from me, that I needed to be there right then doing what they wanted, but they didn't really want to, talk to me or, spend time with me. So I was very much a resource. I was the mummy resource. And it started to not sit very well with me because I was sort of like, well, hold on, something's not so good here. And I'd also been starting to stand up more with, my partner at the time or the dad, and starting to go, no, this isn't okay, the way that he was treating me in certain ways. And I began to feel a lot of different feelings about, why I set it up that they could treat me like a resource, why I was just jumping to attention when they called, why they didn't knock. They didn't knock to come into my room. They'd just talk to me when I was in the shower. They'd interrupt me when I was in the toilet. There wasn't really any space for me, at all. And there was never it was always about what they wanted or what was hard done by for them, rather than seeing that, no, we're a family and everyone, has things they need to do, and they're not, their concerns and stuff aren't the only concerns in the family. And I also noticed that they didn't really appreciate everything that they had. So they have very lovely, they have lovely clothes, they have lovely home to live in, they had really lovely food, and I'd make them heaps and heaps of food. And we were starting that they were learning how to cook, so I was teaching them how to cook and follow recipes and things like that. But they would still expect that, I do everything, and that it was sort of fun if they wanted to, but not seeing no, this is actually a necessity for your life, that you need to start learning how to look after yourself and be responsible for what happens in your life. So all of these things, there are some examples. I'm trying to think of other examples. Other things, they'd use certain things and not put empty packets away. They would leave a whole lot of dishes out when they'd finished, but they wouldn't think about the next person coming in, and that is usually me, who'd have to clean up before I could actually do anything. So just a lot of sort of, on-flow effects of things that the dad and I taught them that they could get away with. When I say get away with, more that we just said, well, we'll pick up after you, or we'll fill in the gaps, or no, you don't have to do that. Or it's fine to treat us like this because you're the kids and you're far more important than we are. And that was the attitude we fostered in the children. And also said that they were entitled, like, that they should get certain things. And how dare we not, like, jump to attention when they needed it? And so anyway, these are just some examples. And I was like, well, yeah, this is quite a problem. And I started to think, okay, sure, I put up with this. And so this is sort of a thing. I was like, well, I do this, but if they treated their partner like this, whether that's, a man or a woman, it, like, doesn't matter about gender, how do I feel about that? And I didn't feel good about that. I actually felt like, no, there's a really big problem if they're going to treat their partner like this, because they're just going to expect their partner to be their slave and do whatever they want them to do. And when they don't, they're going to get angry at them. This is not good. And that was a really big motivation for me, because I was like, well, I'm modeling to them how they're going to treat, their future partners and their children. Like, what are they going to expect of their children? How are they going to treat them? Like, if they can't look after themselves, how can they look after anyone else? And they might not have children, but how can they look after anyone else? And not even that, just looking after themselves. Like, I don't want to have kids in my home when they're of legal age to be out in the world living their own life. Not because I don't like them, just because I kind of feel like that's a bit off and not very good for them either, but, I can see, I suppose I went from needing the kids so that I would have a role as a mummy for my whole life to actually becoming realizing that, hold on, they need to be self-responsible, and my neediness of sort of shackling the children to a role of child is a really big problem here. Anyway, I started just thinking about all these things over a period of time, and that's when the experiment sort of came into being. Was like, okay, these are all the problems that I've just listed on this video. There's more, but those are some of them. And wow, what am I going to do about that? Other issues with treatment of me was like condescension towards me, belittlement of me, manipulation of me, like basically, like sometimes literally saying, oh, you're such a bad mum, if you don't do that for us, you're such a bad mum. And I started thinking, well, that's not very nice either. And if that's how they're going to treat me, then they're going to probably treat other people like that too. And it doesn't feel good when you're treated like that by anybody. So, and I have this feeling in me that as the parent, I have a lot of responsibility for what I have taught them or allowed in our family. And some things have been like actively, like I've encouraged, and some things I just have allowed because I didn't say no. So I don't necessarily approve or think that some of the things they do are right, but because I didn't want to actually have the confrontation with them of like saying, no, this is not acceptable behaviour and this is the consequence for that, because I didn't want to have any conflict whatsoever, they now act out in certain ways as well. So there's a lot of different ways that I have enabled or created this kind of behaviour, literally created it, or enabled them to act in this way and treat me in the way that they do. So I'm saying that because I can see my responsibility in it and I can see how it came here. But the main thing is that they need to realise that they're making choices now. They're not just reflecting me. They are making choices to treat people in a certain way, and that's their choice, and they're going to start reaping the results of that, of this. And they also need to see that it's wrong. Like if you treat someone like that, so for instance, if you punch somebody or you leave a whole messy house, no one's going to want to live with you when you get older. They're not going to be able to get a job if they don't know how to look after themselves and clean up and be self-responsible. Like who wants to employ someone who doesn't want to do anything? No one. So I kind of started thinking about the future ramifications as much as, well, what's happening now, and realised that I was in a very serious situation that needed to change. And that is when the ideas started to come, or I sort of mentioned it, and then Jesus gave me the idea. He sort of just made suggestions, to be honest. And I love that about Jesus and Mary. They often make you have conversations and they might just be like discussing things and whatever, and suddenly I'm like, oh, that's such a good idea. And not that they even like they never think that you should do that. And sometimes they don't even like make like pointed suggestions. They just say, oh, well, I suppose one way you could help develop self-responsibility is, they could make enough money and, buy a tent, And in Queensland, it's pretty mild, so it's not really a big deal living outside. And yeah, I thought it was just really interesting how the sequence of events went. But as I reflect on it, all of this stuff's been happening for years. It's not like it's suddenly new. It's just that it feels now important to me to change it. And it feels very important to me that I do as much as I possibly can now to remedy what I've done wrong. And I'm purposely using the word wrong because, teaching a person that they're better than another person is wrong. And actively treating another person as though they're better than another person is wrong. And causes a lot of problem and conflict in the world and has caused a lot of pain to a lot of people if you look at extreme examples of that. I just noticed that this generation, I feel like a lot of parents are sort of in rebellion towards their parents. Instead of dealing with the pain and heartache that they've had with their parents, they kind of go, well, I'm not going to be like my parents. So that's what I did. I was like, well, both Peter and I felt that our parents are being quite strict and harsh on us in certain areas and certain ways. We went, we're not going to be like our parents, arrogantly. And we're going to be better than that, arrogantly. And we're not going to have any rules. Wow, I tell you, that does not work out well. And it ends up in the situation that I'm in of, well, when I say that, I've actually been trying to correct quite a lot of this behaviour for a number of years now with the kids. So it could be a worse situation. But currently, we're correcting some things that I feel we've kind of got to the emotional stuff now that needs to change in the children if it's really going to change. And I'm just setting up an environment that really encourages emotional expression and to work through emotions, and also encourages the kids to explore and find out what they're doing and how they treat others as well as how they treat themselves. And that's something that also has come up. So sort of now talked about loving others and how they weren't. So that's sort of how they treated me. But something else that has come up in their cleaning, which is quite interesting now that they've moved out of home, and again, thank you to Jesus for helping me to see this, is that I just noticed that, again, they can clean, but even on their own, they had sort of a period of time where they were trying really hard to keep things clean and they did really well. But now they're sort of in an angry phase that's well, it's never going to change, it's never going to happen, and blah, 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 about the whole thing. And they sort of have got less clean and tidy, which is how they've always been. It's not like a different thing. It's just that they tried a behaviour change and it didn't really last. And yeah, Jesus having a conversation with me said, well, often when people have a very untidy environment, it's a lot about how they feel about themselves. They don't love themselves that much, and he said, have you talked to the children about how they feel about themselves? And Jesus is a very wise man. And in hindsight, I can see that what he said really applies to me as well. Now, my home's much cleaner and tidier now than it's ever been, and I find that the easiest I've ever in my life felt to keep it clean. But it's been through my relationship with God and feeling how God feels about me that has sort of been a natural result as I've worked through some emotions. The cleanness, tidiness has come because of that. So with the children, I explored this further. So I sort of just said about me because I can see my issues that I had. And I know that was passed down to the kids too, and that they don't feel that great about themselves. They think they're great, they do. And they'll even say, oh, I'm really good at this, and I do really good at this. And, they'll tell you they're really good at this and that they can do it and they're fine and whatever. But their actions over time demonstrate that they don't, that's not what's happening. So there's something wrong with this picture. And so once I had that conversation, then I actually talked to the children, and I one morning we were just sitting there and said, oh, well, guys, I've just, I just wondered, like, how you really feel about yourselves, like, what do you feel? Like, when you feel yourself, how do you feel? And it was really interesting. Like, all three children just started, like, kind of tearing up, like, and they said, I don't really feel like I'm very good at anything. And I talked to them separately. And they were just like, I don't feel very good about myself, and I don't feel like I can really do very many things. And they had different, like, concerns and worries and feelings about themselves, but each of them sort of connected with this feeling of, like, yeah, I don't feel good about myself. And so then I was able to have a really good talk to them just about, just how that, like, cleaning up and keeping things clean and tidy is a reflection of how they really feel about themselves. And just talk to them about, if they actually did an experiment and ask God how God feels about them, and begin to receive God's feelings about how God feels about them, that they may find, that things change if they can work through some of the emotions about it. Jesus, in the conversation with me, also just talked about, self-esteem and how to grow self-esteem, and that's how God feels about me is how my self-esteem has grown, and also the other way for me is, like, honouring God's laws and honouring truth, particularly, like being really truthful about things. And as I've been, truthful about things with myself, but also with others, seeing the positive results of that. And I think I was talking earlier just about how the rewards for being in harmony with God's laws are really plentiful. And for me, one of, being truthful and transparent is one of, God's laws. And you get a lot of rewards for doing that, in the sense of I feel better about myself, and life becomes simpler. Like, I don't have to, like, hold on to any lies or stories. It's sort of like, well, this is how it is. And right now, I'm not saying that sometimes my feelings are they're, like, I know they're not God's feelings. They're my feelings, but just being truthful about what I feel angry, or I feel just so sad and I feel like I can't cope and I can't do it. Now, it's not necessarily true, but just being honest about that's where I'm at right now, in all my injured gory, not glory. There's a relief in me for that. I feel that, as an aside, one of the most wonderful things about meeting Jesus and Mary and the Divine Truth teachings for me was that for the first time in my life, I had people who didn't judge me about what I felt. They, in fact, encouraged me to feel what I feel, and just to figure out what God felt as well. Or they had a lot of teaching, so I could actually have a lot of reference points about what God might feel. And just encouraged me to find out, well, what's actually God's truth on the matter, but feel what you personally feel about all of these things, and honour your feelings and work through them emotionally. Don't hold on to them and live in them, but work through them. And I feel like for me that was a godsend, literally, because, I started to trust my own feelings and my own, like, I've always found taking action quite hard, because I was worried about what would happen to me if I did. But I'm noticing the more actions I take, and this is why these experiments I think are so powerful, is that I'm taking actions, and when I take actions, then there's so much feedback to me on, like, from so many different ways, like, and there's also a load of feelings that comes up. And so I'm just seeing that taking action causes the fastest way to bring up emotions for me. And also taking actions also is helping me to see that I can make mistakes and I'm not going to get punished for making certain mistakes. But also making mistakes, I learn a lot from my mistakes. So I'm not very proud of some of the things that I do, but I'm learning from them. And I go, oh, yeah, that wasn't such a good idea. Like, that didn't work very well. Well, you can do it again, or you can learn that that's not the way to do it. For instance, doing what an angry person wants. Bad idea. And I've learned that, well, let me be honest, I've learned that. I know that to be true, but there's still some times where I do what the angry person wants. And honestly, afterwards, I'm just like, oh, why did I do that? This is terrible. Don't do it again. But I suppose I'm more sensitive to the pain now of doing that, and seeing that I've just enabled someone to do something that's unloving and reinforce their belief. And I'm responsible for reinforcing the belief. I'm not responsible for their anger. I am responsible for my choices and actions. And if I'm going, I'll give you what you want, I am saying, you keep being angry and I'll give you more. And now I'm just like, that is a bad idea. Very much with kids, totally with your partner, with anybody, really. Still work to go on that one for me, but just as an example, it's a good example, I think. Yeah, so I kind of it was like from chaos and the difference. So let's talk about some of the differences. So that's how it used to be, and you had a little bit of history. In some of the videos that I do in future, you'll probably hear more anecdotes of different things that happen. I probably should do like a whole thing on what our life used to be like 10 years ago, because it was pretty different than what it's like now. I've noticed over the last 6 months, which has been very interesting, the kids are more self-responsible. They are more responsible, because they've got their sort of own little areas outside. So and I've noticed particularly, they still don't necessarily clean their own things that well, but when they come to, I invite them sometimes for dinner, or we have family time, and I invite them into the house. So sometimes we might watch a movie or have a chat, or just if I feel like inviting them as guests, which is really nice for me as well. And when they they just automatically get up and do the dishes, and say if they haven't done them properly, I just say, look, it's not done properly, and they go and do it again, and they don't have this sort of reluctant, feeling. They don't obviously yet have this total, yeah, we're going to do it, and we're going to do it really, really beautifully the first time. So the attitude still has some way to go, but there's so much less resistance towards me asking them to do something. It's amazing. Still, they're resistive to doing extra jobs, like work jobs and things like that, and doing them for themselves because it's the right thing to do, and not just the right thing to do, because it actually would make their lives a lot easier if they kept things clean and tidy, just, and maintained them daily. But they don't see the benefits of that yet, and they're still sort of acting out of these feelings that they have. So, yeah, when I mentioned, that they don't feel that good about themselves, it's kind of a bit challenging, because though they don't feel that good about themselves deep down, they also have all of this other surface stuff where they think they're better than other people, and they think they're doing good, and they think they're doing a great job, and that you should give them a heap of praise for it. So there's kind of a lot of, complex web of different things that need to be felt through or confronted in the children as well. And when I'm talking about the children, but just as much in myself. And yeah, we're just sort of going through a process of doing that at the moment. And that's what this whole experiment is about. So I'm definitely noticing an improvement, particularly in the way that they look after things, and in their environment. But the treatment of me, which is also treatment of others, that's still got quite a long way to go. So I was talking to the kids the other day, did an interview with Archie. I don't know if it will go up on YouTube, but he was able to actually sort of be quite eloquent and express some of the things that are happening in the family, both in the sense of the environment and also the way he's treating me. And he could go, yeah, well, I can see that this isn't so good. And, I can see that I want this from you, or I demand that you do this for me, or when I'm quite capable of doing it, and these kind of things. The other two, so Charlie and Iz, it was quite interesting with them, because I asked them and said, well, do you understand, what you are doing? Can you tell me what you're doing? And they couldn't. They actually were like, well, I don't really know. And that was great, because that brought up this issue of well, unless you can see the problem, unless you can see the issue that's happening, you can't change it. There's no solutions to problems that you can't identify. And so that was great, because that pointed me in the direction of well, they don't really understand yet what's happening. And now that's just what I talked to them about. I said, so have you figured out, what you're doing, your part in what's happening here, your part in this? Because they've sort of just had this feeling well, mum's just being unkind and mum's putting us outside. They're not seeing, well, hold on, I'm doing something, and this is a result of what I'm doing. And if I change my attitude, then I can be inside, like things can be different. For this example. But in general, as a principle, if I change my attitude, then maybe other things in my life will be different. So for me, it's quite helpful because I can see where they're at. And it also, I don't spend like heaps of time sort of encouraging them or pushing them or trying to force them to do things. I just talk to them about where they're at. I just say, well, this is where you're at. This is what's happening. You know, what do you want to do about that? And then if they go, well, nothing, then I go, oh, okay, well, now we've got a conversation about that to have. And it's good. Like it saves me sort of time and effort. Another thing I suppose that I've been like heard via Divine Truth teachings is that if you're in the spirit world, you get the next thing that's going to help you the most to work through it. And I'm starting to see that. Like often I want to give the kids more information, but they're not yet ready for that information. If they ask, totally happy to give it to them, but it actually has a lot more power by finding out where they're really at, because they can then identify with that and they can actually do something about it. So we're also talking about, you know, like having a plan for personal change, and how do you go about making personal change, and what qualities do you need to develop in order to do that. And at the moment, Archie's more interested in those kind of things. The other kids are sort of when they hit like an emotion and they feel sort of bad, and after they've sort of gone through a bit of a feeling, then they start opening up and asking questions. But often I'm noticing as well, they just want to sort of zone out or not really think about it and just continue the way they're going. And I respect their choice in that. I raise that with them and say, oh, I've noticed that, you know, it seems like you don't want to change much. You know, why is that? And if they want to have a chat about it, they do. But yeah, and I say that casually. We have a lot of chats, and I talk very frankly and openly with the kids about what's happening, and, you know, about their choices and decisions. And yeah, I like that. I feel like, I don't know, I look forward to sort of seeing what their choices and decisions are. Like they've in an environment that's really encouraging them to make positive change. And I know that if they made the changes, they'd be a lot happier. But I'm also learning about free will and how I can't, you know, influence others to change. And often I'm also finding that sometimes I try and influence the kids or other people, even just by making suggestions sometimes. And sometimes the on-flow effects of those are just like disastrous, because it didn't come from their desire to change. It didn't come from their desire to do the right thing or do something different. It came from my suggestion. And I'm just finding for myself, it's like until I want to make a change and until I take the steps to discover something for myself or really want to know, honestly, like people have spent many hours, like probably like months equivalent with me, trying to help me to see something. And honestly, it's only sometimes when I go through certain emotions that I suddenly actually want to know and can absorb that information. And I feel a bit sad sometimes. So I think, my goodness, like that's lost. And that's often I record training or for things like that, so it's not totally lost. I can go back and listen to it. But I'm just noticing how our desire, our personal desire inside of us is so important in order for us to actually make changes. So sorry, there's a bit of an ending aside there at the end, but the main crux of that was just to illustrate some examples of what it was like before we began this experiment, which I've called Experiment Self-Responsibility. In contrast, well, I haven't really contrasted. We're just sort of talking about what it was about before, but just I've mentioned some contrasts and some changes that have happened in the family dynamic. Again, that's it for this video, and I will see you when I make another one. Bye till then.